Somewhere in Australia right now, a phone is ringing inside a police station. On the other end of the line, a voice is breaking. A mother, a husband, a daughter. Someone trying to explain, through shallow breaths and half-formed sentences, that a person they love has not come home. This happens 150 times a day across the country. 150 families thrown into the same spiraling panic, the same frantic mental arithmetic, the same desperate retracing of steps and scrolling through unanswered text messages. More than 56,000 missing persons reports land on the desks of Australian police every single year. And while the overwhelming majority end in relief, in a knock on the door and a familiar face standing on the other side, there remains a stubborn, agonizing fraction that never resolves. Roughly 2,600 Australians have been classified as long-term missing. People who stepped out of their lives 3 months ago, a year ago, a decade ago, and simply never reappeared. No body recovered, no goodbye letter, no final confirmed sighting, just absence. An empty chair at the dinner table that no one has the courage to remove. Psychologists have a clinical term for what the families of the missing endure. They call it ambiguous loss. Professor Pauline Boss, the researcher who coined the phrase, describes it as one of the most devastating forms of human grief, precisely because it has no resolution. The person is physically gone, but psychologically present. There is no funeral, no coffin to lower into the ground, no definitive moment where grief can begin its slow, painful work of healing. Instead, the family exists in a permanent state of suspension, caught between mourning and hoping, unable to do either one completely. Studies conducted by Australian researchers have found that families of long-term missing persons are significantly more likely to develop prolonged grief disorder, post-traumatic stress, and major depression than families who have experienced a confirmed death. Because at least with death, however brutal, there is an answer. With a missing person, there is only the question, and the question never stops asking itself. Tonight, 2 of those questions unfold simultaneously, in 2 different states, under 2 entirely different skies. One will end with a miracle. The other will end with something far stranger and far more unsettling than anyone involved could have predicted. It begins with a backpack. Thursday afternoon, October the 28th, 2021. The suburb of Lane Cove sits on Sydney's lower North Shore, a corridor of sandstone homes and overhanging eucalyptus where the loudest sound on most afternoons is the rhythmic thud of a tennis ball against a backyard wall. Centennial Avenue is one of those quiet residential streets where nothing remarkable ever happens, until today. A passerby notices a woman's backpack sitting on the roadside. It has not been tossed from a moving car or dropped accidentally by someone rushing to catch a bus. It looks placed, deliberate, set down by someone who had no intention of picking it back up. The passerby opens it. Inside, neatly packed together like the contents of a life compressed into a single bag, are an Australian passport, a birth certificate, a driver's license, multiple bank cards, a Medicare healthcare card, underwear, skin lotion, reading glasses, and a mobile phone. Cash is still inside. Nothing has been stolen. Every document a person would need to prove their identity in the modern world, every card required to access money or medical care or board a flight, has been left behind on a suburban street in the middle of the afternoon. The passerby calls the police. Officers from the North Shore Police Area Command arrive and begin cataloging the contents. When they cross-reference the identification, a name surfaces. Kathleen Riethmuller, 28 years old, a data scientist who grew up in Brisbane, Queensland, graduated from Brisbane Girls Grammar School in 2010, earned a Bachelor of Business Management and Science from the University of Queensland, and had been living in Sydney for approximately 5 years, working in data science, innovation, and market development across consulting, finance, and startup sectors. On her professional profiles, she described herself with the quiet confidence of someone building a serious career. On her personal social media, She was more guarded, more private, almost invisible. And then, buried among the belongings in the backpack, investigators find a receipt from a Bunnings hardware store in the suburb of Arterman. It shows a purchase made that very morning. 50 meters of heavy-duty rope. The alarm is immediate. Kathleen's apartment is empty. Her phone is in the bag. She has no means of communication, no identification, no money in any accessible account. And she is carrying 50 meters of industrial rope to an unknown destination. The police fear the worst. A missing persons alert is broadcast across New South Wales. Sergeant Gavin Franklin and Senior Constable Dan Jackson take the lead. The hunt for Kathleen Riethmiller has begun. While Sydney detectives pore over security camera footage and knock on doors across the North Shore, a catastrophe of an entirely different nature is tearing through the state of Victoria, more than 800 kilometers to the south. For days, a merciless weather system has been pounding the southeastern coast of Australia. Rainfall totals have exceeded a month's worth in under 48 hours. Rivers that normally wind through quiet Melbourne suburbs like docile brown ribbons are swelling into violent, debris-choked torrents. The Bureau of Meteorology has issued major flood warnings for multiple catchments. The State Emergency Service is drowning in calls, hundreds upon hundreds of desperate requests for help pouring in faster than crews can respond. Streets are disappearing underwater. Cars are floating off intersections like toys in a bathtub. Families are climbing onto rooftops with their children and their dogs, staring down at the water rising below them, waiting for boats that may take hours to arrive. In the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, in a modest residential neighborhood that backs directly onto the Patterson River, a woman picks up her phone and calls the police. Her voice is tight with fear. Her stepfather is missing. His name is Neil. He is 74 years old, a retired government worker who spent decades in quiet public service before settling into the routines of a pensioner's life alongside the river. Gardening, reading, taking medication on schedule, living the kind of orderly, predictable existence that a man of his age and health requires. But Neil's health is anything but simple. He successfully beat cancer, a victory that should have bought him years of peace. Instead, the treatment left him with a legacy of severe, recurring epileptic seizures. They strike without warning. One moment he is standing, speaking, functioning normally. The next, his body seizes, his muscles lock, and he collapses wherever he happens to be. Without his daily anticonvulsant medication, the seizures become more frequent, more violent, more dangerous. And on this particular evening, as the worst storm in years hammers Melbourne's southeast, Neil walked out of his house. He was wearing a light cotton shirt and thin trousers, no jacket, no waterproof layer, no phone, no wallet, no identification, no medication. He stepped through his front door into the teeth of horizontal rain, gale-force wind, and flooding that was already threatening to breach the banks of the Patterson River just meters from his home, and he did not come back. Sergeant Dave Ingram takes command of the search. The variables in front of him are nightmarish. An elderly man with no swimming ability and a medical condition that can render him unconscious without warning is somewhere outside in a violent flood emergency, in the immediate vicinity of a river that is approaching catastrophic levels, wearing clothes that offer no protection against the freezing rain, without the medication that keeps his seizures under control. Every passing minute narrows the margin between survival and tragedy. Ingram mobilizes everything at his disposal. Local patrol units fan out across the surrounding streets, their headlights slicing through curtains of rain, scanning every footpath, every doorway, every bus shelter where an elderly man might have sought cover. The conditions are brutal. Visibility drops to almost nothing when the heaviest bands of rain sweep through. Water is pooling across roads, turning familiar intersections into treacherous wading channels. Emergency crews fighting the broader flood response are already stretched thin, responding to dozens of simultaneous rescues across the region, pulling motorists from submerged vehicles, evacuating families from homes where the water has risen above the floorboards. Drone operators attempt to provide aerial surveillance, but the driving rain and violent wind gusts make sustained flight impossible. The drones are grounded. Coast Guard boats are dispatched to sweep the swollen banks of the Patterson River, their spotlights cutting across the churning brown surface, illuminating branches, garbage bins, sections of fencing, all the shattered debris of a suburb being slowly swallowed by water, but no sign of Neil, no figure on the bank, no body in the current, nothing. The river is the fear that no one on the radio is willing to speak aloud. If Neil, disoriented and medically vulnerable, wandered too close to the Patterson River's edge, if his foot slipped on the rain-soaked mud, if a seizure struck while he stood on the bank, the water would have taken him in seconds. The Patterson River during a major flood event is not a river anymore. It is a machine, a relentless, debris-laden conveyor belt of brown water moving with enough force to sweep a grown man off his feet and carry him downstream faster than anyone on shore could react. Hours pass. The temperature drops. The rain does not stop. Radio calls crackle between units, each one delivering the same gut-wrenching update. Negative contact, no sighting, no trace. Neil's stepdaughter sits by the phone, waiting. Every ring could be the answer. Every ring could be the worst thing she has ever heard. This is what ambiguous loss feels like in real time. Not the slow, grinding uncertainty of months and years, but the raw, minute-by-minute terror of not knowing whether someone you love is alive or dead while a storm rages outside your window. Midnight arrives. The search has been running for over 6 hours, 3 in the morning, 9 hours, the first gray suggestion of dawn, 12 hours, 14, 16. The search teams have not slept. They have not stopped. They are running on caffeine and adrenaline and the stubborn professional refusal to accept the worst until every last possibility has been exhausted. 17 hours, and still nothing. Back in Sydney, the investigation into Kathleen Rithmuller is deepening in ways that no one anticipated. Detectives have spent days reconstructing her final movements with the precision of archaeologists brushing dirt from buried artifacts, pulling together security camera footage from across Sydney's north, interviewing witnesses, tracing financial transactions, and building a minute-by-minute timeline of the last day anyone saw Kathleen Rithmuller alive. What emerges is not the portrait of a woman in crisis. It is the portrait of a woman executing a plan. At 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, October the 28th, Kathleen is captured on security cameras leaving the Sydney Boulevard Hotel at 90 William Street, a mid-range hotel in the Woolloomooloo district near the harbor. She is carrying a backpack, an additional bag, and pulling a large black suitcase on wheels. Her movements are purposeful. She knows where she is going. She has somewhere to be. By 9:30, she arrives at the Elephant Backpacker Hostel on Sir John Young Crescent, also in Woolloomooloo, a well-known budget accommodation frequented by international travelers and transient visitors. She pays for a room. The hostel manager, a man named Nick, will remember the encounter with uncomfortable clarity. "I checked her in and gave her the keys," Nick tells investigators later. "She paid for a budget room. She was jittery and twitchy. That is why I remember her. She was wearing a mask, and I added her to the list, but she never even went to her room. She walked towards the cafe and left, and made her way to North Sydney." This detail stops the investigators cold. She paid for a room she never intended to use. She checked in, received her key, and walked straight back out the door without unpacking a single item. The hostel was not a destination. It was a waypoint. A deliberate false footprint designed to create the illusion that she was settling into temporary accommodation when she was doing nothing of the sort. At approximately 10 o'clock that morning, Kathleen visits an ATM. In a series of rapid withdrawals, she empties nearly all of her savings. $600. 600 more. Another 600. A fourth transaction of $404.40. In total, roughly $2,200. The entire financial foundation of her life, converted from traceable digital funds into anonymous physical cash in a matter of minutes. By 11:40, she appears on the security cameras inside the Bunnings hardware store on Reserve Road, Artemun. She is wearing a long-sleeved blue denim dress and black flat shoes, a detail that will later prove significant to independent investigators is that she is also wearing a floppy black hat, the kind a fair-skinned woman wears religiously to protect against the Australian sun. People who knew Kathleen will later note that she was obsessive about sun protection. Long sleeves, skin lotion in her bag, books about skincare on her reading lists. This was a woman who would never be caught outside without that hat. She purchases the rope. She leaves the store. And then for 3 hours, she vanishes from every camera, every record, every digital footprint. 3 hours of silence. 3 hours in which she could have traveled anywhere, done anything, become anyone. At 2:30 in the afternoon, a security camera in North Sydney picks her up again, still wearing the denim dress and flat shoes, still moving with the same focused energy. 15 minutes later, at 2:46, the final confirmed sighting of Kathleen Riethmuller is recorded. A security camera captures her walking eastbound along the north side of Falcon Street, heading toward the suburb of Neutral Bay. She is alone. She no longer has her backpack. She no longer has her phone. She no longer has any of the identification documents that tie her to the name Kathleen Riethmuller. Somewhere between Falcon Street and whatever came next, she disappears. Completely. Totally. As though she stepped through a door in the fabric of the world and closed it behind her. Her backpack is found 7 kilometers away on Centennial Avenue in Lane Cove. Her phone is found separately, also in the Lane Cove area, by a different member of the public. Both items were deliberately left behind, discarded, shed. But investigators are only beginning to understand how deep this goes. When detectives search Kathleen's known addresses a second time, more thoroughly, turning over every drawer and examining every shelf, they find her personal journals and a laptop. What is written in those pages recasts the entire investigation. Kathleen Riethmuller did not vanish in a moment of panic. She did not flee from a threat. She was not taken. She was not harmed. She disappeared because she chose to. Deliberately, methodically, with a level of planning that would impress a logistician. Her journal entries contain step-by-step notes on how to erase a digital identity, instructions to herself on closing bank accounts, reminders to abandon all electronic payment methods and use only cash, research into how a person can sever every tie to their previous life and construct a new one from nothing. She had been building a blueprint for her own disappearance, writing it down in her private diaries like a project plan, with milestones and tasks and deadlines. And when investigators widened their lens beyond the day of her vanishing, the evidence of premeditation stretches back further. Between October the 20th and October the 22nd, 6 days before she disappeared, Kathleen had listed a series of her personal belongings for sale on Gumtree, the Australian online classifieds platform. A yoga mat, a vintage mustard yellow room divider from the 1970s, a lamp, an easel, a framed mosaic picture. Items worth a combined total of roughly $410. She was not decluttering. She was liquidating, converting objects into cash, shedding weight, stripping her life down to what could fit in a backpack and a suitcase. After her disappearance, the Gumtree account is wiped clean, every listing deleted, her seller profile erased. Someone, presumably Kathleen herself, had gone back and removed the evidence. And then the digital trail becomes stranger still. Kathleen had maintained multiple social media profiles under different names. Her primary Facebook account was unremarkable, but a second Facebook profile, operated under the alias Red Riding Hood, had been active as recently as May of 2021, just 5 months before she vanished. After her disappearance, that account was deactivated. Someone logged in and shut it down from wherever she was, under whatever name she was using. Police confirmed that Kathleen was known to use at least 4 aliases: Amy Munro, Margaret Rithmuller, Kate Rithmuller, Kate Muller, 4 different names, 4 different versions of herself, 4 escape hatches built into her identity long before she pulled the final lever. Her Instagram accounts tell a similar story. One, under the name Kate R., carried a bio that read like a tagline from a different life. Another had been inactive since 2019, but contained photos from work conferences and technology projects, a window into the professional, public-facing version of Kathleen that her colleagues would have recognized. The private version, the one writing in her journals about vanishing, was someone else entirely. Her Goodreads account, discovered by independent investigators combing the internet for any trace of her digital life, reveals 454 books on her shelves, reading lists organized into dozens of categories: entrepreneurship, finance, self-help, mental health, career strategy, fiction classics. In July of 2021, 3 months before her disappearance, she added titles that now read like a manifesto: books about harnessing internal force to live the lifestyle you deserve, books about becoming a successful artist, books about breaking the habit of being yourself. She was reading her way toward transformation, consuming ideas about reinvention and personal liberation with the same methodical intensity she brought to her data science work. And then, months after she vanished, after the police appeals and the media coverage and the desperate Facebook page her loved ones created begging Sydney to help find her, there is activity on that Goodreads account. New books added, reading progress updated, pages turned. Someone, somewhere, is still reading. Detective Chief Inspector Glenn Brown stands before the media during the 2022 Missing Persons Week campaign, nearly a full year after Kathleen disappeared, and says what the evidence has been pointing toward all along. Investigators strongly suspect Kathleen may be alive and possibly living interstate. Any information to that effect would be very helpful to police. He pauses, then adds something that captures the peculiar frustration of this case. Her behavior was clearly out of character when she was last seen, and we have been unable to establish any logical reason for her movements that day and subsequent disappearance. Out of character. That phrase hangs in the air like an unanswered question, because everything about Kathleen's disappearance suggests that it was deeply, profoundly in character, just a character that no one around her had ever been allowed to see. The jittery woman checking into a hostel she would never sleep in. The meticulous planner emptying her bank account in 4 rapid transactions. The keeper of aliases and hidden profiles. The reader of books about becoming someone new. This was not a woman who snapped under pressure. This was a woman who had been quietly, patiently building the architecture of a second life inside the walls of her first one. And when the day came, she walked through the door she had built for herself and pulled it shut behind her. Her family waits in Brisbane. COVID travel restrictions at the time of her disappearance prevented them from flying to Sydney to join the search. A family friend, speaking anonymously, tells reporters that the Rithmullers are devastated and bewildered. They were in regular contact with Kathleen. She called, she messaged, she maintained the outward rhythms of a close family relationship. But she told them almost nothing about her life in Sydney. No details about her friends, no names of colleagues, no descriptions of her social world. She kept her parents close enough to reassure them, but far enough to ensure they would never see the machinery she was building behind the curtain. Deputy Premier and Minister for Police Paul Toole addresses the public alongside the investigative team. The ripple effect that occurs when a person goes missing without reason or without a trace should not be underestimated, he says. He is talking about Kathleen, But he could be talking about any of the 2,600 long-term missing people in Australia. Every one of them leaves behind a ripple. A family frozen between two impossible states, unable to grieve because there is no proof of death, unable to hope because there is no proof of life. Just the ripple, spreading outward, touching every person who ever loved the one who vanished, distorting the surface of their lives for years, for decades, sometimes forever. In Victoria, the 18th hour of the search for Neil arrives with the first pale light of morning. The rain has finally eased. The sky, which spent the entire night pressing down on Melbourne like a gray concrete lid, is beginning to crack apart at the seams, letting thin shafts of daylight spill through. The rivers are still dangerously high. The damage to the southeastern suburbs is extensive. But the storm itself, the relentless, hammering fury of it, has passed. Sergeant Ingram has not slept. Neither has anyone on his team. They have spent the night wading through flooded streets, scanning riverbanks with spotlights, coordinating with drone operators who could not fly, and Coast Guard crews who could barely see. 18 hours of searching in conditions that would challenge the most elite rescue teams in the country. 18 hours without a single confirmed sighting. 18 hours of radio calls that all end the same way. Negative. No contact. No trace. The logical part of every investigator's mind has already begun composing the worst-case scenario. An elderly man who cannot swim, who is vulnerable to seizures, who is wearing no protection against the cold, who has been exposed to a violent storm for an entire night, does not survive 18 hours outdoors in these conditions. The medical literature is unambiguous. Hypothermia sets in within hours at these temperatures, especially in wet clothing. Without shelter, without warmth, without medication, the body's core temperature drops, the heart rate slows, confusion deepens into unconsciousness, and unconsciousness deepens into something else entirely. But Ingram does not call off the search. He expands it. Fresh units are brought in. The search radius is widened beyond the immediate residential area surrounding Neil's home, pushing outward into the commercial district, the industrial zones, the side streets and parking lots and abandoned properties where a disoriented elderly man might have stumbled while trying to find shelter from the rain. Drones finally take to the air, their cameras sweeping the landscape from above, scanning rooftops and alleyways and the overgrown lots behind warehouses. Coast Guard boats continue their methodical passes along the Patterson River, though every member of every crew knows that if Neil entered that water during the night, the chances of finding him alive are essentially zero. The minutes pass. The tension on the radio is almost physical, a held breath across every channel, every unit, waiting for the call that will either justify every hour of exhaustion or confirm the fear that has been building since midnight. And then, from a highway patrol unit sweeping through the commercial district several kilometers from Neil's home, a transmission cuts through the static. They have spotted someone, a figure, sitting in the grass behind an abandoned building. An elderly man, thin cotton shirt, soaked through, trousers caked with mud, matching Neil's description. Sergeant Ingram's team converges on the location. The scene they find when they arrive will stay with every officer present for the rest of their careers. Neil is alive. He is sitting in the cold, wet grass behind the building, curled into himself, shivering so violently that his entire body is vibrating. His lips are blue. His skin is the color of ash. He is barely conscious, his eyes half open, his responses slow and confused. He has been sitting in that grass, in the rain, in the wind, in the freezing cold, for nearly 20 hours, without shelter, without warmth, without food or water, without the medication that keeps his seizures from seizing control of his body. By every reasonable medical calculation, he should not be alive. Paramedics descend on him immediately. His core body temperature has dropped to a level that places him in the severe hypothermia category. He is dehydrated. He is disoriented. His body, already weakened by cancer treatment and the constant neurological stress of his seizure condition, has been pushed to its absolute limit. He is transported to the nearest hospital and admitted directly to the intensive care unit in critical condition. For 6 days, Neil fights. His body, battered and depleted, engages in the slow, stubborn work of recovery. Doctors monitor him around the clock. His family keeps vigil at his bedside, the same family that spent the previous night sitting by the phone, caught in the grip of that terrible, breathless uncertainty, not knowing if the next call would bring relief or devastation. On the 7th day, Neil goes home. He walks back through the front door of the house beside the Paterson River, the same door he walked out of a week earlier into the worst storm in years. He is tired. He is weakened. But he is breathing. He is present. He is there. The celebration among the search team is not loud. It is the quiet kind, the kind that happens in the eyes and in the chest, when people who have seen too many cases end badly are reminded why they keep searching through the rain and the darkness long after the odds have turned against them. Because sometimes, despite everything, the person is still out there, still breathing, still waiting in the cold grass behind a building that nobody thought to check until the 18th hour, still alive. 2 cases, 2 disappearances, 2 entirely different species of vanishing. In Victoria, an elderly man walked into a flood and was dragged back from the edge by searchers who refused to stop looking, even when every statistic said they should. Neil's survival is a testament to something primal and beautiful in the human commitment to finding the lost, the sheer, irrational, magnificent stubbornness of people who will wade through floodwater in the middle of the night on the off chance that someone is still out there, still holding on, still needing to be found. In Sydney, a young woman spent weeks, possibly months, quietly dismantling her own existence. She sold her possessions. She emptied her bank account. She checked into a hostel she never intended to sleep in. She walked through the streets of a city she had called home for 5 years, shedding her identity piece by piece, her passport on a suburban sidewalk, her phone in a gutter, her name in a stack of discarded documents, until there was nothing left of Kathleen Riethmuller but a ghost and a question. The case remains open. Her family remains waiting. The police believe she is alive. They believe she is out there somewhere, walking through some other city, answering to some other name, living a life that none of them are allowed to see. And on a Goodreads account registered to a woman from Brisbane, with 454 books on her shelves, pages are still being turned. Someone is still reading. Whether the missing are elderly survivors weathering impossible odds in the teeth of a storm, or young professionals who have meticulously engineered their own erasure from the record of human existence, the phenomenon of vanishing remains one of the most complex, emotionally devastating, and morally ambiguous challenges that any society faces. In a world where every transaction is logged, every movement filmed, every heartbeat potentially tracked by a device in our pocket, the ability to simply walk away, to shed a name and a history and a life the way a reptile sheds its skin, remains not only possible but disturbingly common. Thousands do it every year. Some are running from danger. Some are running from themselves. Some are running toward something that the rest of us will never understand. Every 18 minutes in Australia, a phone rings inside a police station. A voice speaks a name. And somewhere, in a flooded suburb or a quiet coastal town or a crowded city street, a person is missing. Some are found within hours, some within days. Some are found alive behind an abandoned building after spending an entire night in the rain, impossibly, miraculously, stubbornly alive. And some choose to remain unfound. For the families of the missing, there is no comfort in statistics. There is no solace in probability. There is only the silence, the vast, suffocating, endless silence where an answer should be. And the phone that might ring at any moment with news that will either end the nightmare or deepen it beyond measure. The hardest thing about loving a missing person is not the grief. Grief at least, has a direction, a shape, a beginning, and eventually an end. The hardest thing is the waiting, the permanent, unresolvable, soul-crushing act of waiting for someone who may never come home and who may have chosen, quietly and deliberately, never to return. That is the cruelest thing about disappearance. Not the absence itself, but the silence that fills the space where an answer should be. A silence that stretches across days and weeks and months and years, growing louder with every passing hour, until it becomes the loudest sound in the room. I'm not posting this for thrills. I'm posting it because I learned the rules the hard way, and I don't want you learning them the same way. If you take the unpaved road out along the rim at Angel Peak Scenic Area off US 550 near Bloomfield, New Mexico, and you plan to stay past dark, bring another vehicle, and park nose out. My spouse and I didn't break any laws or mess with anything. We thought we were being smart, careful even. We were wrong about what careful meant out there. We picked a bluff-top pullout in late October of 2022 because the air was cool and the sky out there looks clean enough to drink. I mess with landscape shots on weekends, but this wasn't a big trip. We'd been married 3 years by then, both of us 31, both of us thinking we knew how to handle backcountry camping. Cheap lantern, enamel pot, paperbacks. Our old 4Runner knows that road. It's got a ladder rack on the back that rattles when you climb it, the kind of rattle you learn to ignore after a few trips. 2 sites over, a family in a red pickup built a quick camp. Father looked about 45, mother maybe a year or 2 younger, 2 kids in their teens who moved with that efficient silence you only get from families who camp together regularly. No music, no noise, no generators up and down the rim, just the wind coming in off the Badlands and the smell of sage so strong it made my sinuses clear. We set up before sunset. The shelters out there are simple roofs with a table under them, open to the view, the kind of setup that feels safe because you can see everything coming from every direction. Angel Peaks sat across a maze of white and gray ridges like a flat-topped island. The light went orange first, painting the rock formations in shades that don't exist anywhere else I've been. Then it shifted to purple, then to that particular shade of deep blue that lasts maybe 5 minutes before true darkness hits. I remember thinking the whole scene looked like something from a coffee table book, too perfect to be real. The kind of landscape that makes you understand why people used to think certain places were sacred. I was stirring ramen when movement on the rim path caught my eye. At first I thought jogger, which didn't make sense out there, but people train on weird surfaces all the time. Ultra runners do stranger things than jog along exposed bluffs at dusk. Only this wasn't a normal run. The figure moved low, torso level, arms quiet against the sides, gliding more than stepping. No headlamp or reflective anything. No sound of footfalls on gravel or the ragged breathing you always hear from someone pushing themselves at altitude. It traced the edge of the bluff in a lazy arc and stayed there, just far enough that I couldn't make out details. Just a shape that was always in motion. The distance was maybe 200 yards, that middle ground where you can tell something is human-sized but can't pick out features. I kept glancing up and losing it behind rock outcroppings, and then catching it again farther along the rim, always maintaining the same strange fluidity. The ground out there breaks into dips and small shelves, loose scree patches that shift under your boots if you're not careful, spots where the edge crumbles if you get too close. The shape never changed pace for any of it. It went up a small roll in the ground without any check in rhythm, without that forward lean you always see when someone climbs, and slid down the far side like it was on rails. My spouse joked that maybe the person was training for altitude races, and I shrugged, but I kept watching. The thing about watching something that bothers you is that your brain tries to normalize it. You tell yourself stories. Maybe they're a local who knows every inch of that trail. Maybe they grew up running these paths and can do it blindfolded. Maybe they're wearing dark clothes, and that's why they blend so well with the rock. Your mind does these small acts of kindness to keep the fear pushed down where it can't bother you too much. But some part of me, the part that had spent 6 years as a wildland firefighter before I took the desk job, knew the movement was wrong. When you work in the backcountry long enough, you learn to read how things move. Animals have their own rhythm. Humans have theirs. This thing had neither. It had the purposeful quality of something hunting, combined with the endless patience of something that doesn't get tired. The family 2 sites over got quiet. I noticed it because they'd been talking in low, comfortable tones while they set up their camp. The kind of family conversation that's more about presence than content. Now they were still. Their father stood by the truck bed, hands resting on the side rail, facing away from the view and toward the same line of rim where I'd last seen the shape. His shoulders were rigid in a way that suggested he wasn't just stretching his back after a long drive. Dark took over between one breath and the next. That's how it happens in the desert. One moment you have enough light to see details, the next you're squinting at shapes. We turned the lantern down to stretch the fuel. No point in burning through it when we had the whole night ahead. Stars came on hard, that desert sky that makes you understand how people used to navigate by them, how they used to tell stories about them. I didn't want to fixate on the ridge path, so I did camp chores, stowed the bowls, shook out the tarp, tied a loose line that had come undone from the shelter post. The wind moved in uneven pushes, not steady enough to predict, just present enough to mask other sounds. Behind me, small pebbles ticked down the slope. The sound was distinct, rhythmic almost, like someone dropping gravel one piece at a time. I turned with the lantern, and the sound cut off instantly. The beam showed nothing but gray rock and scrub brush. I set the lantern down on the picnic table, and it started again from farther left, a soft cascade of tiny impacts. After a minute, it came from the right, then behind the shelter post where the light didn't quite reach. It wasn't constant, just a quiet spaced pattern that drew a circle around us, moving counterclockwise around our campsite. Small rocks don't roll uphill, and the slope didn't run all one way. Some spots tilted toward the bluff edge, some toward the parking area, some ran level. For the sounds to move in a circle like that, something would have to be causing them. I told myself it was animals. There are plenty out there. Ringtails, foxes, coyotes, even the occasional bobcat if you're unlucky. But it felt patterned, like something testing how close it could get without being seen. Like something mapping our position in the dark, learning the layout of our camp through sound and movement. My hands started to sweat despite the dropping temperature. I wiped them on my jeans and went around to the back of the 4Runner to put the pot away, to do something normal and practical that would remind my nervous system that we were just camping, just doing what we'd done a dozen times before in a dozen other places. The dust on the bumper near the ladder rack showed a mark I hadn't seen earlier. You know how you can press your hand into dust and it leaves the shape for a while? It looked like that, but wrong. The palm was long and narrow, twisted a little to the side, like it had been jammed down to get grip on the metal. What got me were the knuckle spots. There were more than there should have been, spaced in a way my brain tried to turn into normal and couldn't. I touched it with one fingertip, and a little drift of powder fell off the bumper. The mark underneath was smeared where my finger had been, but the rest remained clear. 4 knuckles where there should have been 3. The thumb impression too far to the side. The whole thing elongated in a way that suggested whoever made it had bones that bent differently than mine. My heart started doing that thing where it feels like it's beating in your throat. That physical response you can't talk yourself out of no matter how many rational explanations you try to stack up. Maybe someone from another campsite had leaned on our truck while walking by. Maybe it was an old mark I'd never noticed. Maybe the dust had settled in some weird pattern that coincidentally looked like a distorted handprint. None of those explanations felt true. Hey, my spouse said, low from the shelter. Their voice had that particular quality that meant they were trying to stay calm while something bothered them. I think they're packing. The family 2 sites over had moved fast without making a show of it. The cooler was already in the bed of the truck. The dome tent that had been up not long before was gone, rolled and strapped, with the kind of efficiency that comes from practice. The father stepped out into the common view line like he was just stretching his legs, casual and unhurried, in a way that felt deliberate. He looked right at me across the space between our sights and shaped 2 words with his mouth without sound. Car now. His face in the dim light from their own lantern showed no panic, just absolute certainty. I didn't make a speech. I didn't ask my spouse what they thought, or suggest we tough it out, or convince myself we were being paranoid. Something about the father's face, about the way he'd mouthed those words, flipped a switch in my head. I just said, "We're going to head out." And we started moving like we'd trained for it. Lantern down to a low setting, chairs folded without bothering to wipe them down, sleeping bags thrown into the back with no folding, stove tossed into the storage bin without parts sorted or cleaned. I kept the light pointed low, not scanning for anything, just keeping the ground honest so we wouldn't trip and hurt ourselves in the rush. Down the slope, a dry scrape moved across stone and stopped. It sounded like someone dragging a stick across rough granite, except there was a weight to it, a deliberate quality that sticks don't have. The ladder rack let out a thin metallic note as the wind hit it from a different angle, or maybe it was something else. I didn't turn around to check. When we shut the rear hatch, my hands were shaking enough that I had to try twice to get it latched properly. The family's truck was already idling, that low diesel rumble you can feel through the ground. No headlights yet. They were turned toward the road and waiting, giving us space to pull out first since we were parked closer to the exit track. We pulled out first because we were closer to the track. I kept the beams on their lowest setting until the road dropped away from the rim, partly to preserve our night vision and partly because some instinct told me that calling attention to ourselves with bright lights would be a mistake. The surface was the kind that turns into washboard if you drive it when it's damp, and then it dries with ridges baked in, a corrugated mess that makes your fillings hurt. The steering wheel hummed in my hands, harmless and familiar, just the normal vibration of rough road travel. A quarter-mile in, the road dips through a shallow saddle before climbing toward the entrance. Standard geology for the area, nothing remarkable about it. As the 4Runner nosed over that dip, the back end sagged hard, like 2 people had stepped onto the rear ladder at once. I've hauled plenty of gear, loaded that rack with kayaks and bikes and camping equipment until the suspension groaned. I know what weight feels like. This was sudden and substantial, enough to make the front tires lighten on the gravel. The steering went floaty, that dangerous feeling when the front end doesn't want to track straight anymore because too much weight has shifted rearward. The tires chattered on gravel in a way I know well from loading too much weight in the back, that rapid skipping sensation that means you're close to losing traction. The metal in the rack gave off a groan I hadn't heard from it before, a deeper note that suggested real stress on the welds. "What was that?" my spouse said, not loud, not panicked, just enough to confirm it wasn't my imagination, that they'd felt it too, that the laws of physics had just told us something was now on our vehicle that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I didn't want to stab the brakes and pitch the weight forward. Didn't want to find out what would happen if whatever was back there got thrown off balance and toward us. I feathered them gently, feeling for traction, feeling for control. Whatever was on the rack shifted. You can feel that through the whole vehicle when you've done enough dumb camping loads over the years. You get the slide first, that lateral movement as weight redistributes. Then the frame flex, the entire body of the vehicle twisting slightly. Then the slight yaw, the rear end wanting to swap places with the front. I felt all 3 in sequence, each one distinct, each one confirming that something heavy was moving around back there like it was trying to find better purchase. Then a heavy drop hit the gravel behind us. It wasn't a rock. Rocks bounce and scatter and make multiple sounds as they come apart or roll. This was a one-piece landing, followed by a second, lighter thump, like something landing on 2 feet instead of 4. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw dust hanging low in our taillights, illuminated red and dense. Something long dragged along the passenger side rear quarter panel as it regained balance. The sound was clean and thin, like a screwdriver line across paint, deliberate and controlled. Not the chaotic scraping of something falling off a moving vehicle. This was intentional, the sound of something steadying itself, using my truck's body as a handhold while it found its footing on the road. The family's truck behind us tapped its brakes twice, quick flashes of red, and gave us a little more space. Enough that if we needed to stop suddenly, we wouldn't get pushed. Enough to tell me they'd seen something too, that this wasn't mass hysteria or shared delusion. They were experienced enough to know that if something went wrong up ahead, they needed room to react. I kept the speed steady and the wheels straight, fighting every instinct that told me to floor it, to get as far from this place as fast as possible. Panic kills people on backcountry roads. Rollovers kill people. Losing control in the dark on washboard gravel kills people. Whatever was happening, I needed to stay controlled. The shock passed. The weight was gone. The suspension settled back to normal, but the rack rattled more than before. A new sound mixed in with the familiar one, like something had been bent or loosened. We came to the entrance sign, that big brown National Forest marker that looked beautiful in the starlight, and took the fork toward US 550 without looking anywhere but the road ahead. I didn't check the mirrors. I didn't scan the roadside. I just drove, focusing on the immediate practical reality of keeping the vehicle on the road, of not clipping a rock or dropping a wheel off the edge. We hit the highway in a pair, hazards on for the first few minutes like we were a funeral procession. The adrenaline ebbed in steps. First when we saw another set of headlights coming from the south, a semi or RV that represented normal people doing normal things on a normal night. Then more when the first town lights showed up ahead, that orange glow on the horizon that meant electricity and gas stations and other human beings who had no idea what kind of night we'd just had. We pulled into the big bright lot by the gas station near where US 550 and US 64 meet in Bloomfield. The place was loud with regular life in a way that felt almost aggressive after the silence of the rim. Teens laughing by a car, working on something under the hood. The chime from the convenience store door opening and closing, the smell of fryer oil floating across the pumps, mixing with diesel and gasoline. That didn't make me feel safer exactly, but it put distance between us and the rim, created a buffer of normalcy. The father from the other campsite walked to the back of his truck and angled the tail light housing under the overhead lights. The red plastic had 4 gouges carved into it, deep enough that you could wedge a coin. The spacing was wrong for human fingers. They curved inward, not down, like whatever made them had wanted to grip the light fixture itself, not just scrape past it. The plastic was scored white in the deepest parts where it had been compressed before it tore. He didn't make a scene. He looked at me like this was business, like this was information being transferred from someone who knew to someone who didn't, and said the only sentence I've repeated word for word since that night. Folks call it a skinwalker. Don't camp up there solo after Halloween. We checked our own rig. The scratch started under the lower rung of the ladder rack, tracked forward across the quarter panel, and ended at the fuel door. It wasn't jagged like a branch would make. It looked planned, a single movement, straight and confident, not the flailing of something slipping or the random damage from road debris. The paint had a pale curl at the edge where whatever made the line had lifted tiny shavings as it went. I set my fingernail in it and felt it catch, felt the depth of it, felt how it had gone through the clear coat and into the color layer beneath. That kind of scratch doesn't come from anything light or accidental. It takes force. It takes intention. We didn't fill up. We didn't talk with the family about back roads or trails or who was from where or what we'd all just experienced. There was an understanding that talking about it wouldn't help, that trying to make sense of it would just make it harder to drive away. They got in and pulled out, taillights still bright but scored, heading north while we headed south. We booked a cheap room in Farmington with a bed that felt like a board and a TV that buzzed with some electrical issue. I kept thinking about the weight on the rack and the way the suspension had communicated the truth of it, the honest sag that happens when something climbs where you didn't invite it, the physics of it, the realness of it. I didn't suggest going back in daylight to look for tracks. I didn't trace the scratch for an hour like someone obsessed. We slept badly, both of us waking at sounds that turned out to be ice machines or people walking past our door. We left early, before the free breakfast, before the sun was fully up, driving straight through back to Albuquerque where we lived. Back home, I bought a small bottle of rubbing compound and a foam pad and worked the quarter panel in the shade of the carport. Most of it blended after an hour of careful work. One thin mark stayed. Under certain angles, you can't see it at all. Under others, it shows as a hairline under the clear coat, like a faint healed cut on skin that never quite disappears. We kept the Forerunner. We kept camping. We didn't go back to that rim. 2 weeks later, I pulled the rear hatch trim to quiet a new rattle in the rack. The top bolts were shiny, like they'd been rubbed with fine grit, but only on the faces that would get contact if something slid forward and then off. That wasn't from any gear we carry. We strap everything tight, use proper tie-downs, check them twice. You can say it was old damage that I never noticed. You weren't the one who cleaned those bolts last spring with a wire brush and locked them down with blue thread compound. If you need a lesson out of this, take mine. That rim feels safe because it's close to a highway, and because the sites look like regular picnic spots. They are not a regular place after the last of October. If you go anyway, don't stay alone and don't get cute with your lights or your bravado. Park so your nose points out. Pack before the sky goes black. If you start hearing small rocks roll in separate places around you, and it sounds like nothing when you look, stop treating it like a joke. The family who warned us didn't owe us anything. They still hung back and watched us out to the entrance sign, making sure we made it to pavement. People will tell you the story is missing proof. That's fine. Proof isn't what made me change my habits. The scratch on the quarter panel taught me more than 100 pictures could. The way the back end dropped taught me enough for 3 trips worth of lessons. The gouges in that tail light were wrong in a way that doesn't leave your head once you've seen it. Maybe it was a person trying hard to look like something else. Maybe it was a trick of angles and wind and nerves. Believe whatever lets you sleep. Just don't stay up there alone after Halloween. And if you do go, despite everything I've told you, make sure your vehicle is pointing toward the exit before dark. Make sure you can leave fast. Make sure you're not giving something the chance to decide whether you leave at all. I still have the Forerunner. I still take it camping, but I don't take unpaved roads near reservation land in late October anymore. I don't dismiss strange sounds as wind, and I check my bumper for marks I can't explain. That's what the rim taught me. That's what those few hours cost. God help anyone who learns it harder than I did. I need to say this up front so you understand I'm not spinning some campfire tale. I attended Northern Arizona University in the fall of 2022, and I used Walnut Canyon the way most students use a gym, except mine came with a view. The trail system sits close enough to campus that you can finish an afternoon class and still catch an hour of daylight on the rim. If you're from Flagstaff, you learn early to pack a headlamp and an extra layer. The temperature doesn't just drop when the sun goes down. It plummets, sometimes 20 degrees in under an hour. Late September that year, 4 of us decided to squeeze in the Island Trail loop after our last Thursday class. We had maybe 90 minutes before the visitor center locked its gates for the night. I'd hiked that route at least a dozen times. I knew the paved sections, the metal staircases, the viewing platforms where tourists took photos of the cliff dwellings. I thought I also knew which informal side paths were just shortcuts worn in by locals, trails that reconnected to the official route within a few hundred feet. I was wrong about that. Wrong enough that I don't trust unmarked trails anymore, no matter how well traveled they look. Our group was me, Jade, Liam, and Quinn. I'm the one who actually reads the trail maps and carries a compass I know how to use. Jade's the practical one. She keeps a first aid kit in her pack and took a wilderness medicine course over the summer. Liam's strong, played football in high school, but he's not great on uneven terrain where every step requires balance. Quinn jokes through everything and showed up that day in worn-out sneakers because it's basically just stairs, right? We descended the island trail as the afternoon light turned amber. The metal steps rang under our boots. Other hikers were already heading up, making the final push before closure. We passed them with nods, and I felt that comfortable urgency you get when you're cutting it close, but not actually worried. At the bottom, we walked the loop past the Sinagua cliff dwellings, stayed behind the protective barriers, and didn't linger. The shadows in the canyon were already thick and blue. When we climbed back up, breathing hard from the elevation and the pace, we reached the top of the staircase where the official trail curves right toward the visitor center. But to the left, there was a narrow footpath threading along the rim through low scrub and pale limestone shelves. The dirt looked packed and fresh, like 20 people had walked it that same day. It aimed in the general direction of the parking lot, cutting across maybe a quarter-mile of rimland instead of following the paved switchback. "That'll save us 10 minutes, I said, pointing. "It looks like it meets back up near the lot." Nobody questioned it. The sun had already slipped below the western rim, and the air had gone from warm to jacket cold in the span of 5 minutes. The path looked obvious enough. We started walking. For the first few minutes, the shortcut felt fine. We could still hear the distant hum of Interstate 40, that constant white noise you stop noticing when you live in Flagstaff. The rim up there is mostly exposed rock with clusters of juniper and small oaks just starting to turn gold. The path stayed clear, winding between boulders and staying about 15 feet back from the canyon's edge. Then we walked past something that made Quinn stop talking mid-sentence. Behind a waist-high limestone outcrop, sheltered from the path by about 10 feet, lay a deer. Not the scattered remains you'd expect from a coyote kill or a mountain lion cache. This was arranged. The rib cage had been cleaned completely, each bone visible and white as if someone had taken a wire brush to it. The spine was intact, curved in its natural position. The hide had been peeled back in a single piece and folded beside the skeleton like a blanket someone had just removed. There was no blood in the dirt, no drag marks, no scuff patterns showing how the carcass had gotten there. And balanced on top of one of the exposed ribs, right in the center of the chest cavity, sat a smooth river rock about the size of my fist. It wasn't wedged in. It was placed deliberately, like a paperweight holding down a document. I knelt down, staying a few feet back, and looked for tracks. I know enough to check for prints, scat, fur caught on branches, anything that tells a story. On a patch of fine dust near the carcass, I found impressions. They started out looking human. Barefoot width, clear heel strike, visible toe definition. The prints led away from the deer in a line, heading deeper into the scrub. Then they got strange. After 3 or 4 normal steps, the angle of the foot changed. The toes began pointing inward, pigeon-toed, as if the person walking had started to turn their feet as they moved. 2 steps later, both feet were fully rotated, toes pointing inward at unnatural angles. And then, for the next 6 or 7 steps, the toe arcs faced completely backward. The prints looked like someone had been walking toward us while actually moving away. I've seen people walk backward for fun, leaving reversed tracks. These weren't like that. The stride length stayed consistent. The depth of each impression showed normal weight transfer from heel to ball. The spacing suggested a forward walking rhythm, not the shorter, cautious steps of someone moving in reverse. "This is a ranger thing," Liam said, his voice tight. "Some kind of cleanup or research project. I looked for boot treads, tire tracks, anything official. I saw nothing but those wrong-facing prints trailing off into the brush. We need to keep moving," Jade said quietly. Her voice had that forced calm people use when they're trying not to spook a group. "We need to get back on the real trail." None of us touched the rock on the rib cage. We didn't photograph it. We just started walking again, faster than before and closer together. About 50 yards past the deer, I started noticing the sound. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just that every time one of us took a step, something else took a step through the brush to our left. Same pace, same rhythm. When we paused to negotiate a tricky section of trail, it paused. When we sped up, it matched us. The timing was too precise to be coincidence, like a metronome clicking alongside us. I tried to get a clean look. I'd stop suddenly and pivot, hoping to catch whatever it was off guard. But every time, I only got partials. A vertical shape behind a tree trunk, a suggestion of shoulders behind a boulder, something tall standing perfectly still in the gaps between junipers. It never stepped into the open. It stayed in that last band of shadow where the evening light couldn't quite reach. We passed another patch of exposed dust. 2 more prints waited there, side by side, toes pointing backward again. No approach marks leading to them. No trail leading away. They were just there, as if someone had stood in that spot for a moment and then vanished. "Don't step in them," Jade said. We gave the prints a wide berth. The thought of putting my boot down inside one of those impressions made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't articulate. Quinn hadn't made a joke in 10 minutes. That alone told me everyone else felt it too. This sense that we'd crossed some invisible boundary and something on the other side had noticed. I decided to test it because I needed something concrete, something that wasn't just my imagination running wild in the low light. I picked up a rock about the size of a softball from the trail edge, wound up, and hurled it hard into the scrub where I'd last heard movement. It landed with a muffled thump against brush and dirt. A heartbeat later, no more than that, a second rock came clicking back out of the same area. Not thrown hard, just tossed. A casual, sharp sound like, "Here's yours back." There hadn't been time. Not enough time for someone to locate my rock in the brush, pick it up, and throw it back. And the sound profile was identical. Same weight, same type of impact. It was as if my rock had been caught mid-flight and immediately returned. "Nope," Quinn said. "Nope, nope." Then he went quiet again. "Eyes forward," Jade said. "Don't look at it. Just walk." We did eyes forward. We focused on the trail, on our footing, on the growing glow of security lights visible ahead where the park's maintenance area backed up to the rim. That worked fine until Liam stepped on a hidden piece of basalt, concealed under dried grass, and his ankle rolled hard. Liam went down with a sound that made my stomach clench, not a shout, just a sharp exhalation of real pain. Jade was beside him in seconds, pack already open, pulling out her first aid kit with the efficiency of someone who's done this before. She checked his foot for circulation, palpated the joint, wrapped it tight with an ace bandage, and gave him ibuprofen from a small bottle. "Don't test it yet," she said. "We're going to move you carefully." We did the math quickly. I'd take point and set the pace. Quinn would stay 10 steps behind me as relay. Jade would support Liam's bad side and keep weight off the injured ankle. The plan was simple. No running, no splitting up, no stopping unless absolutely necessary. The thing in the brush adjusted to our new, slower pace like it had been training with us all season. If we paused, silence. If we took 3 steps echoed from the tree line. Once, when I spun around fast enough, I caught a shape that could have been a tall person standing motionless between 2 junipers. The proportions were wrong, though. The arms hung too low, the head tilted at an angle that didn't match any posture I recognized. It didn't duck or hide when I looked directly at it. It just held perfectly still until the fading light and my own doubting eyes lost the outline. We crossed another dust patch. 2 more prints waited there, side by side, toes facing backward. No trail leading in, no trail leading out. We stepped around them. The maintenance area appeared ahead, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Security lights had clicked on automatically, casting harsh white pools across stacked lumber and equipment. I could see a pale cinder block building and one of those green utility carts the staff use on service roads. We reached the nearest gate, locked. A fat padlock hung from the chain. I rattled it once, then stopped because the sound felt too loud, too much like ringing a dinner bell. Inside the fence, everything looked normal and human and safe. Outside, in the tree line just beyond where the security lights reached, something stood and matched our position step for step. If I moved 2 steps right, the silhouette did too. At first glance, it read as human, a tall person in dark clothing. But the longer I looked, the more wrong the proportions felt. The arms hung lower than they should. The way the head turned suggested the neck attached higher on the back than anatomy allowed. A utility cart's electric whine cut through the silence. A staff member in his 40s rounded the far end of the fence onto the service road. He took in our situation immediately. 4 hikers at a locked gate, 1 injured, something lingering just outside the light. He didn't waste time with questions. He waved hard, pointing toward a service gate around the corner, and started moving. We started hobbling after him. That's the only word for it, hobbling. Liam's adrenaline had worn off completely, and now the ankle was a throbbing problem that made him hiss with each step. As we moved, the silhouette outside the fence changed posture. It shifted from standing still to something ready, coiled. Then it broke into a run parallel to us, maintaining a strict distance from the light line, as if there was tape on the ground it refused to cross. But it didn't run right. The arm swing was off. The gait was too smooth, too effortless, eating ground in a way that looked strong without looking like it required any effort at all. It peeled off into the brush at the corner where the fence turned, disappearing. Liam lost it for a second, not screaming, but panic breathing in a way that made him sway. He dropped to one knee, hand on the ground. I lunged forward to grab his other arm. Something else got there first. I felt it before I saw it. A pressure on Liam's upper arm, a strong, steady push upward, like someone helping him stand, except the contact points were wrong. The grip had too much spread between the fingers. The touch was cold, and the strength was undeniable, leaving pressure marks I could see forming even in the bad light. Liam lurched upward, as if hauled by an invisible handle. He stared at me with wide, broken eyes. I shook my head. I had no explanation to offer him. The maintenance worker met us at the service gate, keys already in hand. He opened it, waved us through, locked it behind us, and kept his voice low and steady, the way people who actually handle emergencies talk when they know how fast things can deteriorate. He didn't tell stories. He didn't lecture. He glanced at Liam's bandaged ankle, said, "Good work on that," and gestured toward his cart. "Get in." The only extra thing he did was point at the dust outside the fence as he swung the gate shut. 2 clean impressions marked the ground there. Toes arcs pointing wrong again, facing back the way we'd come, while the heels pointed toward us. "Don't cut that trail," he said. "People have been warned. Some things track you when you break the rules." That was it. No smile. No spooky tone. Just a flat statement of fact. He drove us the back way to the parking lot, staying on service roads we didn't know existed. He parked beside the visitor center and watched while we got into our car. He kept watching until our headlights were on and we were pulling onto Walnut Canyon Road. He didn't wave. He didn't try to tell us more. I respect him for that. At home, Liam showered and sent a photo to our group chat, even though none of us had asked for one. He developed a bruise on his upper arm, forming in the distinct shape of a handprint, except the fingers were long bars of pressure that didn't match anyone in our group. Jade measured it against her own hand because that's who she is, methodical, needing data. The finger spans were wrong, too wide, too long. The thumb placement was off. That bruise took nearly 3 weeks to fade, longer than it should have based on how deep the blood had pooled under his skin. His ankle healed faster. We went back the next day, not to that trail, to the visitor center, to ask casual questions about hours and closures in a normal, friendly way. The front desk staff told us the posted times, reminded us to stay on marked trails, and mentioned that rangers do occasional patrols, but can't cover every area. We didn't mention the deer. I don't know why. Maybe because saying it out loud would have made it sound like we were telling a story for attention. None of us wanted that. We hiked the official route that day. We didn't take shortcuts, even the ones that obviously just cut off a gentle curve and rejoined the main trail 20 yards later. We didn't see anything unusual. The wind made normal grass sounds. Our boots scuffed rock like boots should. The only other people we encountered were a retired couple from Iowa who asked where the restrooms were. It was just a park again. But Liam kept that ace bandage in his truck afterward. Quinn bought real hiking boots. Jade started carrying 2 headlamps so she could loan one out if needed. And I stopped cutting trails anywhere, even when I'm absolutely certain they just reconnect around a single tree. I know the erosion argument for staying on marked paths, and I believed it before. But now I follow the rules because they seem designed to keep something else from noticing you. Call that superstition if you want. I call it risk management. I've thrown rocks in the woods dozens of times before and since. I've never had one thrown back from the same spot, same weight, same sound, in the same second. I've seen animal tracks that looked strange due to erosion or overlay. I've never seen footprints with toes facing backward that couldn't be explained by someone literally walking in reverse. I've helped friends up off the ground more times than I can count. I have never felt a stranger's hand reach them before mine did. I don't use certain words lightly, and I won't pretend to understand what they mean to people whose traditions and knowledge systems aren't mine. I'll just say the behavior fit the pattern that students around Flagstaff talk about when they share trail warnings: pacing, mirroring, matching steps, staying just out of clean view until the moment it becomes conveniently inhuman. You can call it a trespasser messing with us. You can call it a tall trail runner with unusual gait. You can call it a trick of distance, stress, and failing light. Pick whatever explanation helps you sleep at night. I'm not here to argue or convince you. I'm here to tell you what happened and what I learned. A 5-minute shortcut near closing time isn't a shortcut if it puts you somewhere a maintenance worker has to extract you from through a service gate. If you hike near Walnut Canyon and you see a narrow track along the rim that looks like it'll save you time, don't take it. Use the official trail and be bored for an extra 10 minutes. Bring a headlamp even if you swear you won't need it. Wear boots that won't fold your ankle. Travel in groups. And if you were the tall outline pacing us that evening in late September 2022, or if you're anything like it, I have one simple request. Let's not meet.